Podcasting from a remote location somewhere deep in the heart of New York City. This is Crypto Characters, and I'm your host, Jason Nagy. Our guest for today is the venerable René Dreifuss, head coach at Radical MMA, black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and many other arts, and a white belt in joke telling. René, welcome to the podcast.
Is there something lower than white belt in joke day? I think I'm that, actually. Negative white belt.
That's right.
But I enjoy my jokes. I do enjoy my jokes. Nice to be here, and I'm very happy and honored to be on and to discuss my martial art journey and your martial art journey, and how that can relate to maybe an educational experience for your listeners.
That's right. And so you know, this podcast is called Crypto Characters, and it focuses on innovation, typically through the lens of fintech. But I think that there's a lot that people can get out of martial arts and the martial arts mindset.
Absolutely.
And I think it applies to everything, particularly in innovation, and particularly when you're talking about jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts. So I'm excited to have you here because you have a ton of knowledge about this stuff. And it's the people that are in the fintech space will gain a tremendous amount from hearing what you have to say and talking about this stuff.
Well, it's interesting you say that because there's one of the most famous martial artists, Miyamoto Musashi. You're obviously a fan because you prepared some quotes here, and actually you hit on one quote that I really like, and he said, when you learn the way, you see the way everywhere, and it's apparent in everything. And that's a little bit, sort of Asian mystical hocus pocusy, but basically like this: the path of success, the path of achievement, there's some universals there. Whether you're Michael Jordan, whether you're Bill Gates, whether you're Hicks and Gracie, that path to success is very, 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 very. There. If it's a Venn diagram of all these people, there's a tremendous amount of overlap. And I think there's certain things you have to do. And if innovation is something that is important to you, then most likely you'll be successful because you innovate your own knowledge, but also you innovate the field as well. And that's what, to me, martial arts is. I don't do anything the same way I did 10 years ago. I've seen that. My entire martial art career evolves and changes over time as I learn more, and it's kind of interesting too because this becomes like sort of a little more meta. But there's someone said something that every time you learn a new piece of information, and when we talk information, we mean something more deep. You approach the world as a different person because you really are a collection of your experiences and how you see the world. And if you add to that level of information, it changes the way you see the world, then you are actually a different person. So to me, growth, are you the same person you are when you're 13? Of course not. Or 8, as you grow as a human being, you become someone different. When you grow in skill, you approach the world, you approach your career, you approach your art, whatever it is, very differently. And the same thing if you look at great art like Picasso or something. Okay, he's in his blue phase, but he wasn't always in that. There's a trajectory of evolution that is so there. The same thing with Bill Gates. How he got started in his garage and then went from one software package engineer to another, and then dominated all different spaces of technology. And I think there's these universals of evolution. And for me in my martial art path, that is so important to never be satisfied where you are. That is my mantra. That's like, what can I get better at today as an instructor and also as a practitioner? And to me, that's what gets me fired up and gives me passion each day and get forward, because it doesn't get old,
It's true. So you mentioned a couple of names, and I want to go over them so that people understand what you're talking about.
Sure. So yeah, not everybody knows Hicks and Gracie, I guess.
Hicks and Gracie, or how about Miyamoto Musashi, right?
Right.
So why don't you tell everybody who Miyamoto Musashi is, and just so everyone understands, you have a master's in from Columbia in Japanese. Is it
Japanese
ancient
studies.
military
No.
studies?
I did. It was a cross-disciplinary. It's called Marcy. It's a cross-disciplinary program where you can attack a subject matter from many different perspectives. So, like if you go to poli-sci, you're going to study poli-sci. If you study Japanese history, you're studying Japanese history. But my master's degree was from a sociographic and sociographic perspective. So we're doing an analysis of the trajectory of Japanese martial arts, Japanese warfare, over time, looking at from political perspective, from social perspective, historiographic, and also from economic perspective. Because at the root of things, militaries are run by
their bellies.
Their bellies, yes.
And that costs money.
Right, exactly. By what's the word?
Logistics?
Logistics, yes. That's the word I was looking for. Like logistics. So the reason why Japanese warfare looked the way it was has to do with how rice was cultivated in Japan and how many people they could feed and things like that.
You're kidding me.
No, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, because
that's fascinating. What do you
couldn't
mean?
field massive armies because they couldn't feed massive armies. And, it's like that until later, as economics changed, their warfare changed.
When the trains came, that changed, I would imagine, right? Because the trains, it went from big shipping, right? I guess that might have started. You tell me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that big shipping might have changed the way food was transferred, and after that,
actually,
the trains.
The funny
right?
and interesting thing is Japan had intra-commercial network that was very, very sophisticated. So I actually, I'm not an expert on the advent of trains on Japanese mercantile economy, so I cannot speak on the detail, but my gut feeling is they're not that much changed because they're so highly sophisticated in their trade routes before that. And also Japan's not that big, you're not
Right.
counting Okinawa or something, right? But which was its own kingdom.
You're going to offend all those Okinawans,
No, but they kind of see themselves as not really. They speak.
They're
a
like the
different language.
Sicilians of
Yes,
Japan.
Exactly right. And their language is very different. Their culture is extraordinarily different.
Right.
But let's get back to Miyamoto Musashi.
Actually, before we get back to Miyamoto Musashi, you didn't just get a master's in Japanese studies from Columbia. You also lived in Japan. You're fluent in Japanese. You worked for a Japanese company and as a Japanese translator.
And Japanese government too. I worked for many years.
You did? Okay,
Yes.
I didn't know that. So
You're not pay much.
Well, why should that be different
Public
from
sector,
ours, right?
God damn it. Good benefits though.
and really the point is though that when you speak about Miyamoto Musashi and when we're talking about when we talk about it, for some reason I thought that you might have read it in its original Japanese. I don't know if you did because
I did not.
1600s was when his book was written, right?
No. The what you mean, the Book of Five Rings?
The Book of Five Rings.
Yes. No, I've not read the Book of Five Rings in. I thought you were talking about his biography, sorry, but no, the Book of Five Rings I have not read in historical Japanese, even though I do have some ability to read historical Japanese, but it's been very rusty. And my first introduction to the Book of Five Rings, which is Miyamoto's treatise on strategy and combat, which he actually wrote in a cave towards the end of his life when he was retired and took the order took orders as a monk. He distilled his concepts and the essence of philosophy on fighting, and he was a famous duelist. He began as a low-level samurai, and his first his first experience in combat was actually the most important battle in Japanese history, called the Battle of Sekigahara, where the Tokugawa shogun basically won. There's a little wars after that, but the Tokugawa shogun, which won and unified Japan, which was the biggest battle of that 600-year period. So there was a 10th century shogun, massive civil war, not from the 10th century onward, but let's just be simple. After that shogun broke up, there was massive civil war up until the unification in 1600, and then there was a time of peace until the black ships of Commodore Perry showed up and said, "Hey guys,
what's going on?
Yeah, what's going on? Time to join the real world, otherwise we'll bomb you." And Japan had to really modernize. But Musashi was fought in that battle.
What year was it?
1600, exactly.
Okay.
1600.
1600. Okay.
Yes.
How old was he when he fought in it?
He was young. I don't know exact age. You put me on the spot here.
Well,
it's been a while.
So I know
but
he
was young.
I know a little bit about Miyamoto Musashi.
Yeah.
It's primarily from you talking about it, or maybe I looked it up afterwards. But you were talking, I think, about the Book of the Five Rings, and I could never really get into Sun Tzu's Art of War, and my understanding was that the Book of the Five Rings was really more about that had direct applicability to the martial arts way, let's say. Some of it not so much, because it talks about long swords versus short swords in it.
Yeah.
Short swords,
Yes,
excuse me. But that was why I picked it up.
It's more meta, right? And I think
and I
Sun
thought
Tzu
you
is-
told me
Right. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
that when he was 13, he had his first duel.
That's true.
And-
That's actually true. Yes.
And he like fought a really bad like samurai and killed him.
yeah, he had his first duel when he was 13. Yes.
Right. So that was why I asked how old he was, because in the Book of the Five Rings, he says, I started this book when I was 50 and I finished it when I was 51. And he talks about the battles that he had won in the book. So I was just trying to get a baseline of kind of where he was at his lifetimes, because it's a pretty ancient book,
Yeah.
and it's read today. I got it on Amazon. I don't know how many
Right.
books other than
It-
Beowulf you could do that with.
Right. No, it's actually interesting because it goes in vogue back and forth. Comes back into season. It's one of those books that was extraordinarily popular in the 80s among businessmen and understanding how Japan sort of dominated the economic sphere in the 80s, because obviously Japan was very strong then. But it was also something that American generals would read to maybe get a handle on Japanese commanders and the Japanese, way of fighting in the Second World War. It's a fascinating book. It definitely has some elements which are completely practical in how you cut someone with the sword, but most of it is more meta, where you can say, oh, there's this idea here. And it's not unlike Sun Tzu, where you're thinking more broad strategy and broad strokes and how you approach combat or conflict. And this is what really life is. Life is conflict. And I'm not saying life is war, but when you are jockeying for a position and competing against someone else, that's conflict. When you have a disagreement or a court case, that's conflict. It's not violent conflict, but there's some universalities to when your product is on the market and going against another product. That's conflict. There's some universalities of how to approach human violence, and those are very applicable to any type of larger conflict, and how you strategically position yourself to defeat your opponent. And I'll tell you, another area where the Book of Five Rings was very, very popular. I remember it was in high school. My high school had a very, very strong debate team. And I remember in my Japanese class, one of the debaters, I was studying Japanese at the time, one of the debaters on the team, he was reading the Book of Five Rings to kind of think of how he could strategically out-debate people, and, if he could get some pointers, And so my first experience with the Book of Five Rings was when I was about 10 years old, because I started martial arts when I was 5. I'd already been training very seriously by the age 10, and was very into Japanese culture, a little bit otaku, as they call it today, But there
What
was
does
no.
that mean,
That's
otaku?
like nerd, a Japanophile, but sometimes people use it as a badge of honor, and sometimes people use it as
Quite literally like nerd.
Nerd. It is, yes. It's
perfect.
like, it's obsessed.
Or geek.
Geek.
It's really
yeah,
geek
yeah.
now, right? It's like
yeah.
geek.
Sometimes it's positive, and sometimes it's used negatively, right? Depending
Right.
on who you ask. But I was definitely a Japan nerd, but really, really interested in martial arts. I was bullied as a kid, and it was not a pleasant experience, and I wanted to obviously be able to protect myself. And I think even if you've never, ever done martial arts in your life, the samurai ideal is something that is so deep in our consciousness of a warrior. So there's a Spartan warrior, maybe a medieval knight, cowboy from the West, and a samurai. And these are like these kind of archetypes. They're almost Jungian, in the sense of how we approach manliness or the ideal of a war fighter, and you could even maybe put in modern day Navy SEAL or something like that. But
Yeah, I think that the SEALs are the Green Berets.
Right.
Have come into that. Delta Force is too it's too it's too Black Ops. People don't know, but everyone knows the SEALs.
Everyone knows the
so
SEALs,
you're
and
right
it's sort of
about
like this the elite of human performance, the apogee of what a human being is capable of, because there's no situation more intense than interhuman violence. It just isn't.
It's definitely true.
Because
your life depends on it, right?
Right. And I can speak to that because I've had 17 Vale Tudo fights. Well, 16 Vale Tudo, one
Explain
MMA
what
fight.
Vale Tudo is for people.
Vale Tudo is no rules, unarmed combat. The only thing you're not allowed to do is bite and eye gouge. Everything else is in. Everything. And even though they say you cannot eye gouge and bite, I can tell you in my 17 fights, the person has tried to bite me many times. I can't even count.
They weren't wearing mouth guards?
Actually, you can actually bite through a mouth guard pretty well. But,
oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. It's
because you have the bottom
piece.
set.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Okay.
But a lot of times, you get hit and the mouth guard just flies out. That actually happened to me one time. I got hit and my mouth guard went right into the audience because we were in a cage.
Kind of gross.
Yeah, it was like, can I get that back? Okay, actually, I don't want that back. Yeah, we were fighting in pretty crazy places. But
when was that you did that?
it was in the early aughts.
Right.
Yeah.
Was it in Japan or was it here?
I had some mixed style, not challenge matches, but test of skill in Japan. But it were more friendly. They were very friendly. They weren't like, oh, I'm gonna F you up. But when I came back to America, I started very seriously training Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I was training in California with the Machado brothers, who are very famous fighters, cousins of Hicks and Gracie, who we mentioned before. And then I moved down to Brazil and was training there for a short time. And then I came up here and really wanted to test myself in combat. And that's what Miyamoto Musashi did. Musashi went from town to town, city to city, castle to castle, and said, who is your best swordsman? All right, let's get on, motherfucker. That's it. That's what he did. And there's the most famous duel.
That's pretty crazy, actually.
That's it. The most famous duel was against him versus Sasaki Kojiro, who was the premier. I think he was Yagyu Shintori Ryu. I forgot the style. I have to look at it. This is really bad.
But you should explain what that is.
Yeah. So this is his. They represent different sword styles, and Musashi basically created his own style, which is the Nito Ryu system, which has two blades. That's
a short sword and a long sword.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Which is actually not Japanese. Japanese usually use one blade, right?
Right.
And but he created his own system. But everybody kind of represented their style, and you have that today. Early in the MMA world, the UFC, which is the premier MMA organization.
The UFC won, like the first
right. It was
one
side versus side. Karate versus
right?
judo. Yes, yeah. It was November 1993. Karate versus judo. Taekwondo versus sumo.
It was
and
fun.
People represent their styles, and that's historically what's happened. And back in the ancient Japanese days, he would show up and he fought Sasaki Kojiro, and there was the contest of Ganryujima, which is a famous island. They got to this island, and he was so rude. Because Musashi's so smart. So, etiquette in Japan is so big deal.
Really? I've never heard that.
You never heard that, right?
No,
etiquette
so
is such a big deal.
what I've heard about Japanese
exactly, right? Etiquette is such a big deal. So, and there's always like, you arrive here and you bow and this and that, and that's what's supposed to be done. So what he did is he arrived like way late. But actually, he was just hanging out. Like, he could have been there on time.
Right.
But he was just hanging out. And he make the guy wait, and it's a sort of mental warfare, which that's what's the strategy.
It's their version.
Yeah,
it's their
exactly.
Ancient trash talk.
It's the ancient version of Conor McGregor.
I was going to say he was Conor McGregor.
Right, where he said, no, get this. It's not only that he made him wait, which is the height of insult. And Kojiro's all, instead of being calm and cool, he's all like pissed off. Then instead of fighting, he's like, I'm not even going to use a sword. Musashi said, you know what? See this oar? I'm going to whittle this oar down. I'm going to fight you with an oar, with a piece of wood. That's how little I think of you, because you don't even rate my sword. And Coach was like, I can't fucking believe you, motherfucker. And then he loses.
Did he lose?
Yeah.
With a sword to an
guy
oar?
with an oar, right? Yeah. And
are you kidding me?
And
that's guts.
He believe he shattered Sasaki Kojiro's collarbone. It's been so long. I believe he shattered his collarbone, and then I believe Kojiro died of his wounds. I have to look
from a shattered collarbone.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess you could, right?
Yeah, ancient medicine was not really there, but I mean, he look, imagine getting hit with a really hard piece of wood over and over again, and you're in the middle of nowhere. And
but he had a sword.
Internal bleed. Well, no, he didn't cut Musashi. But let me look that up later.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure he did die of his wounds. I'm pretty sure. But I have to. It's been so long. It's been so long. And let me preface that my master's was not in the study of Miyamoto Musashi. That's not what I studied. So
you just read him.
Yeah, I just read for fun. That was never entered in my academic studies. My academic studies, I know on point still to this day. But that was just something that intrigued me and fun. And he was always I think for almost any martial artist, including Bruce Lee, who looked up to Musashi very well, but any martial artist, almost any style, Miyamoto Musashi looms as this massive ideal that we aspire to someone who dedicated their entire life to the perfection of his martial craft. And in Asian martial art tradition, the idea is that you have done something so spectacular in combat, but what are these universalities that we can apply to interhuman conflict or to life in general, and how we can find enlightenment or whatever. That's the sort of Japanese idea, is to use the martial arts for personal development. And so he's this tremendous figure. And then I would say like it's kind of fading out today, but I just mentioned Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee is another example of someone who is this iconic person outside of his film persona,
right.
But in the martial arts world, Bruce Lee is revered in many ways, especially for his philosophy, and not as much for his fighting skill, because we really don't know how good Bruce Lee was. People say no because he never fought. And honestly, I
saw Enter the Dragon or Return of the Dragon. He was awesome in that.
So now you're just trolling me. But cinema martial arts are pretend, and obviously, and they do not reflect
for John Wick.
Still pretend.
Well, when you get hit laterally in your knee with a car, you're pretty much done.
Yeah,
He gets up and kills like 30 people.
Exactly, right. So and there's cinema martial arts are by nature a form of entertainment. They are not a form of combat. So what we look at when we look at, say, Bruce Lee in the movies, we see entertainment. Now, obviously, you look at the way he moves, tremendous athlete, but he never had any competitive fights in his time. So I personally think he was pretty good, but I don't think he was, the be-all and end-all. There were many better martial artists of his day. That being said, he was very good. But putting that aside, his contribution to the way we think about martial arts is quite significant. And he was one of the first people to say, look, we must continue this process of evolution. We must break out of our styles. Okay, you're karate, I'm taekwondo. You're karate, you're kung fu. I'm sumo, whatever. No, let's understand that each art has something viable and valuable. I should say valuable, and that when we combine these things, the synergy of those fantastic moves together is something that is greater than those parts. The whole is greater than the parts before. So that was revolutionary and made him so many enemies. In the 70s, he was one, in the late 60s, early 70s, and there was another Azuma Takeshi in Japan. Mm-hmm. There's your people who were saying, let's break out of these stylistic confines and evolve past them. And they were routinely lampooned or kicked out. Master Take Azuma was actually banished from his martial arts style.
What was it?
The martial arts style was Kyokushin karate, which is a very hard style of knockdown karate, and he was banished and barred. He was thrown out, and he had to create his own martial arts style called Daidojuku, which he later renamed Kudo, because the Japanese karate styles sued him in court.
Really?
Because they said,
of the name, or
because they said you cannot use karate because what you do is not karate anymore. You're disgraced to us. You're disgracing karate because you've mixed. That's not karate anymore. If you use that, we'll sue you. And I don't believe he lost the suit. I don't really know exactly what happened legally, but I know that eventually he's like, in his academy, he calls it Daidojuku Karate, but in his tournaments, in the organization, the large organization, calls Kudo, because he didn't want to have the problem. So anything larger than the plaque on his door, he doesn't use the word karate anymore, because that was so how far the Japanese were removed from Musashi. Was all about evolution to tradition and doing what your master told you and not seeking on your own. That's not the way Musashi was, but that was the way it kind of became very, very staid, very conservative, and very stuck in the mud. And Bruce Lee and all these other people came out and they said, no, we've got to grow, we've got to evolve, we've got to change, we've got to look. And they're like, no, we're staying with this. And that didn't really happen en masse until 1993, the first UFC. And there's been more evolution in unarmed combat in the last 25 years than there has been in unarmed combat, not armed. But then there has been the last 200, 300, 400. Because,
probably more than that. Right?
Yeah, more than that, maybe even more than that.
Some of these passes that you teach are 600 years old, and you go to the statues and you can see Greco-Roman wrestling or Greek wrestling, really, these amazing statues, and it's the same position.
Yeah, the same position
that is used in wrestling today.
Right. And
in mixed martial arts.
In mixed martial arts, absolutely. And but there are definitely different levels of evolution. The mixed martial art pinnacle of mixed martial art fighters today are the most, not all of them, I'm talking the ones who are good, because they're obviously not everybody's so good, but the ones who demonstrate the highest level of technique are the most evolved, the most technologically advanced unarmed combat combat fighters that have ever walked this earth. And that's a fact.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So not armed, because obviously armed combat's been around for a long time, and but that is because of this concept of consistent evolution and growth without any being beholden to tradition, without being beholden to what your master taught you, without being beholden to what's in your comfort zone, going out of your comfort zone and having a scientific approach to what works. And in my academy, I have a poster of Bruce Lee on the wall, even though I never studied his martial arts or anything like that. But, he's a, like I said, an iconic figure who I always look towards to say consistent, look towards refinement and breaking out of old patterns is absolutely essential. And leads to fantastic results. You can say, you're part of our academy, but we're doing very well. But because we when we fight other people who are kind of a little more stuck in the mud, we just run circles around them.
Well, one of the things that you talk about innovation, and maybe we could talk about this too. One of the things that you did, which I thought was great, was you started working with a doctor to adjust all of these different positions where you're submitting people.
Right. So let me go back to our listeners. People don't understand that the martial art of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which comes from the Japanese tradition but went to Japan, from Japan to Brazil, I should say.
The Japanese tradition of judo, correct?
It was judo and jiu-jitsu. Judo is like so let's back up a little bit. Jiu-jitsu is a way of describing Japanese unarmed combat that is, generally speaking, more oriented towards grappling, which means throwing or joint locks.
And what does it mean in Japan? It actually has a meaning in Japanese.
It means the it's kind of getting into a lot of semantics here, but it means the gentle way. That's the way it's commonly translated. It's not really what it means though, but it's actually no modern word. The word jiu-jitsu did not exist before 1850. The Japanese, each fief had their own master of arms, just like in the West, and he taught his own version of combat. So there would be heiho, which would be the warrior way, the fighting way, or taijutsu, which is like body control, then there would be kumiuchi, which is another name for jiu-jitsu, which would be like, I slam into you, you slam into me, and we crash and wrestle, W-R-A.
Sounds like sumo.
Yeah, sumo, like that, right? And that's one of the traditions. So all these unarmed combat styles that were mostly oriented towards grappling techniques because they wore armor, were what we would call jiu-jitsu. Those major styles fed into judo. So judo is like a style of jiu-jitsu, defining their term as having some lineage to the samurai fighting traditions, and a more orientation towards unarmed grappling. But any lineage towards the unarmed Japanese combat traditions you can define as jiu-jitsu. Okay, that's my definition of that term. So judo is a type of jiu-jitsu. It went to Brazil. Brazil developed their own take, their own refinements, and the Brazilians engaged in a lot of mixed martial art combat, or we would call Vale Tudo back then, where they would just go 2 men enter the cage, 1 man leave. That's really what it was.
Thunderdome.
Thunderdome, right? Exactly. And when you have that, and you have no rules or very minimal rules, and you can see immediately what's effective without biases. Okay, this move is good. This move is not as good. This move is good. This is not as good. And when the Brazilians came on the scene in 1993, no martial artists were prepared for them. They just tore through everybody because they used science. Science. It's simple. They said, what works, what doesn't, let's do what works. Now, what happened was, over time, the Americans started being scientific as well. And every martial art, at some point, every place, not martial arts, but you get a little conservative as you get older. So even the Brazilians started being a little less oriented to science and a little bit oriented more to tradition. But the American mixed martial arts scene has evolved past them. And of course, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a huge part of fighting, Muay Thai, all these other arts. But the combination of the best performing techniques, of the best performing styles, combined synergistically together, has produced just these phenomenally inspirational fighters that you cannot believe how they can do what they do with their bodies. I mean, I saw that famous Pettis kick where he jumped off the cage and then did a flying kick to the other guy's head. You're like, what the hell was that? And that's when I first saw it a few years ago. Now, you know what? A couple weeks ago, I saw little kids in a mixed martial art gym in, I don't know, California somewhere, practicing that.
Really?
Yeah, like 10-year-old kids. Like it's nothing. So the thing that nobody had ever seen before, like 5 years, is still a kick, but his setup of jumping off the cage, getting air, and then smacking your shin into the guy's head, using the cage as a weapon like that, nobody ever seen it before. I'm going to say it never existed because you never know. Maybe some guy in ancient Greece did it or who knows. Right. But as a universal understanding, this move is good. And now they're, like I said, they're 10-year-old kids doing it. And so what are these kids going to be doing in 10 years? It's amazing. It's unbelievable. And the interesting thing is that the evolution of mixed martial arts has come in tandem with the evolution of information technology. Because today, a Brazilian will come up with a move. It'll be on the internet, on YouTube, 10 minutes later. Some guy in Sweden will be like, oh my God, that's cool. How about this for a counter? And then he'll counter it this way. Then he'll put that on. Then some guy in Hawaii will say, well, I'll do this then. And then in the span of like a week, you're seeing these engagements online of like, hey, how about this? How about this? How about this? And then it gets tested. And then it goes in the cage and it gets tested and you see what works and what doesn't. And you see the evolution and how innovation is just tremendous. So this information technology is absolutely essential because one of the things that held martial arts back before is like, okay, if you lived in California and the other guy lived in Russia, you basically had no contact. For political reasons, obviously geographic reasons, whatever. But now, we have these crazy Russian assassins coming in from Dagestan, who they're
of all places.
Right.
Like, what's Dagestan?
Right.
2 years ago, you didn't know.
You didn't know
what it was.
This war torn area. I don't know if it's war torn, but definitely harsh play. And,
I'm sure it was at one point.
Yeah, probably. And I don't know if the people understand. There's a champion in the UFC. His name is Khabib, and there's a video that came out.
Khabib Nurmagomedov, right?
Right. Yeah. And there's a video of him that I saw 15 years ago. No, more, about almost 20 years ago. So it's like, about 2002, something like that, right? And it's him as a kid. His dad or his uncle put it on the web, maybe, when YouTube came out or whatever, wrestling a baby grizzly bear or baby bear. I don't know if it's grizzly bear, brown bear.
Did it have claws?
It's their pet bear.
What do you mean? They have a pet bear?
Yes.
These people are crazy, these
exactly.
UFC fighters. They have a pet bear
they have a pet
with?
bear, and they have the bear, the kid bear, wrestle their son.
A pet bear.
I'm going to pull it up. It's on the. It's like, it's got.
That's insane.
Yeah, and then this kid grew up wrestling a bear. That's what they do, because
That's why he's so good.
The wrestling traditions are very, very strong in these countries, and they have within their wrestling traditions, which is their ethnic, traditions, which actually comes back to the Greco-Roman traditions, because all these areas were dominated by Alexander the Great, and he seeded wrestling all through the Caucasus, all through the Mideast, and all the way even into India. So the spread of wrestling is directly a result of the spread of Greco-Roman culture throughout the Caucasus region and the Mideast. So some of the best wrestlers in the world are Iranian as well. Who introduced wrestling? Alexander the Great. And
Right.
You can even say the origin of Indian Kushti wrestling is from an introduction of that Macedonian army coming in and being there. But
I didn't know that. That's
but
pretty
yeah.
cool.
So then flash forward from Habib, 20 years later, he goes and wins the UFC. Well, guess what? Because he's wrestling a bear his whole life.
So let's just go back for a second.
Yeah.
I think I heard you say
Yeah.
that they wrestle bears there. So it's not just
Not just
it's
him.
not
No,
just Habib. Like
no.
people
They
have
have pet
bears,
bears
they
and they
wrestle
wrestle
with.
them. Yes, that's their thing.
Are you kidding me?
I don't think every family can afford a pet bear, but I don't know. I don't know how humane this is either. But the
Right.
funny thing is, you look at the bear's having fun.
Yeah.
He loves it. This is his brother. Like it's family. It's not like they don't hurt each other.
Right.
But definitely the bear's more the one who's having more fun than the kid. But
I'll bet.
they're pinning each other. For him, the bear's just playing.
Right.
It's not like they're actually hurting him, but they're wrestling. And this goes back to what is the origin. Now, it's a very interesting sociological fact that every clan, kinship group, ethnic background, wherever you are, anthropologically, every what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, kinship group is the anthropological term. But for example, the Native American, Amazonian, Celtic, Mesopotamian societies, Semitic societies. Every society, African societies, has their indigenous form of wrestling. Most societies do not have an indigenous form of boxing.
Really?
Yes, but every single one, without exception, has an indigenous form of wrestling. An indigenous form. Maybe not incredibly evolved, but every community has some form of wrestling. Why? Well, first of all,
It's fun.
that's true, but that's more practical. If you're a hunter and you want to take down a bison, what do you got to do? Well, you got to stab it first, but it's probably still alive. Now you got to wrestle it down, or you're like I worked on a ranch for many years, and
You did?
Yeah, I was working when I was a kid, right? Not
Where?
upstate New York. It was called Rawhide Ranch. It was like a
that doesn't sound like it's an actual ranch.
no, but it was like a place to keep the Western traditions alive, and so they would have kids come as campers. And
Oh,
you
they
would teach
still-
them,
they
teach
still
them how
have
to-
something
stuff
like
that.
that.
They teach them how to ride and teach them how to. I was learning how to be a farrier, how to shoe horses, and how to basically animal husbandry. And then as you get older, you worked on that place and you helped the place run. And so it was a
That's
ranch
pretty cool.
with teaching. Yeah, I loved it. But when you have a calf and you have to give it a shot because the veterinarian is coming in for whatever, what do? You wrestle it to the ground.
Really?
When you have a horse and you want to bring it there and it doesn't want to go, well, you wrestle the animals. That's how you
How do you wrestle a horse?
Well, that's for another story. You can't
They're
wrestle
pretty
it.
big, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, you don't actually attack the horse, but there are
Yeah.
ways to manipulate its head to make him go where you want. Now, of course, it's better with a halter, which is the thing you put on the horse's head. But that's another story. but the thing is, when you're dealing with livestock, what do? You don't punch them.
No, you don't.
You wrestle them and make them go where you want, which is why this. And then when you fight another human being with a weapon, if you don't have a weapon, you better know how to wrestle. Otherwise, you're going to get stabbed. That's a fact. So the ancient Greeks knew this. The medieval knights knew this. A lot of medieval combat that we see in movies is not correct. What it is, they smash each other, and then it's a lot of grappling where they're just like, and then they take
That's
out
how they fought?
Yeah, that's mostly how they fought. Right? Look
I
at the
had no
ancient.
idea.
Yeah, there's a great exhibition at the Met recently about the Maximilian V and the armor that he assembled in his court, and they talked. It has really, really interesting exhibition on the melee, which was the form of entertainment in tournaments where they would fight on their feet, and they would just it was like battle royale. Like there's like 50 people and everybody just fights each other.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, and
I mean, that's actually
and it was
what a melee
blunted
is,
weapons, but still, they could still possibly chop your arm off or something like that. But what happened? You just get one strike in, and then you're just wrestling each other, smashing the guy's head into the mat or into the ground, and that's kind of how you won. And which is combat. There's universals like we were talking about, universals of combat that are divorced from ethnic concerns or contextual concerns about geography or whatever, and or from temporal issues. So the way the physics of our planet have not changed. There's still gravity. You have 2 arms and 2 legs.
That's right.
And you're attacking me one-on-one. What's possible 10,000 years ago and what's possible today are identical because of the laws of nature. That being said, obviously there's evolution in terms of technique and things like that. But what is possible has not changed. So what makes karate or sumo or taekwondo, what are these things different? Are usually contextual, meaning, okay, for example, Japan did not have access to high quality steel. So they had to learn forging techniques that were far superior to other cultures to get the same level of quality. So then that's why Japanese forging techniques are amazing, and also why a lot of Japanese armor is laminate armor rather than wood. Whereas in the West there was tremendous access to steel and things like that. So everybody, and if you have money, you get armor. Obviously that's not always the case. You have to be a wealthy, a member of the aristocracy. But
I always wondered why the samurai armor was wood. It just never. It seemed like it was a far inferior form of protection than.
Well, when you have it's not wood. It's laminate, which has wood. It's the different pieces of different things together. So you have leather, you have wood, all things like pressed like a sandwich. Like
so they would press leather and wood. They were laminating back.
Yeah,
in, like,
and they would have
samurai?
sometimes metal over that, but there wouldn't be a big large suit. It would be like a sandwich of different materials. Mm-hmm. And actually the other reason is a lot of Japanese warfare, again, it's contextual, was what we would consider like guerrilla warfare a little bit, or like the warfare that the plains...
Like ninjas?
No. Like the warfare the Plains Indians used, where it was horseback, shock troop warfare, and it was used originally by the Parthians in ancient
Persians,
world.
the precursor to the Persians.
Parthians, yeah.
No, the Parthians they're from modern day Persia.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Or modern day Iran.
Yeah, a little bit north too, because you can say that they're a little bit more in like the Turco-Armenian area as well. Right? Yes, that's true. Yes, no, you're right. It's not wrong. I was not correcting you. Right, but it depended on what time period we're talking about here.
I took a class in Roman history, and they kept talking about the Parthians, and I asked my professor, where were they from? Troy is Turkey, right? Yes, modern day Turkey. Carthage is Libya. So
exactly.
He said they were essentially where Persia is, but I guess it's also like Azerbaijan and those places.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not disagreeing with that at all. But ever heard of a parting shot? But the actual term is a Parthian shot.
Really?
Yeah, it's a Parthian, because what they would do is these guerrilla tactics where they would come towards you, go away, and come towards you again in waves of assault, the same way the Mongols did. And that type of warfare was also very popular in Japan, because Japan is a mountainous where you can't field large teams of war, or like a huge, massive amount of, thousands of troops that much, and have them be effective if you don't have fields.
Right. It's true. There are parts of France that were conquered over and over again in the Lorraine Valley,
because of geography. No, it's funny because it's funny you should say that, because the major battles of World War I and World War II, like the Ardennes, all this, they're the same major battles of the 15th and 13th century, because that's where the big fields are. That's where we're going to meet, because that's the only place we can meet. The geography is determined. Contextual context is important. Geography very often determines what happens. Right. But aside from, like we're saying, aside from context, there are some universalities that will never change. You have 2 arms, you have 2 legs, there's gravity. So what is possible doesn't change unless we change the context of our engagement so much, like, okay, we're fighting in an elevator, 2x2 box. Okay, now
fun.
I'm not going to kick, because
you can't.
Right, which is why so-called Southern Chinese martial artists were not as much kickers because they were like, this is the story goes. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what they say. But they say is they're fighting in alleyways in these old ancient Chinese cities, and the alleys are so small that there's no way you can kick. Or they're fighting on these little junk boats where you need,
those tiny
the junks.
The junks were huge, actually.
Yeah,
right?
but they have smaller ones too.
Okay.
But basically, you can't kick because you're going to fall over in the water.
Right.
Yeah. So there's context, but obviously kicking could be possible. But because you're in these small areas, it's not contextually appropriate. Now, if you're fighting in a wide open space, of course, kicking is going to be something you do. This is the wonderful thing about MMA. MMA has a cage. It's the first martial art, competitive martial art sport which involves a cage. So the cage becomes a weapon, which is why MMA is much closer to real life than a ring, because a ring gives, and Muhammad Ali used the rope-a-dope. Well, you can't really do rope-a-dope against a wall.
No, you
right?
can't.
Yeah. So in life, you have cars or walls or this.
There are plenty of walls in life.
Right, exactly. So this is why the mixed martial art competition is a little closer to the context, the modern context that we have, the modern reality that we have for self-defense. It's closer. It's not the same thing, but it's much closer than you would say, square boxing ring that has a lot of give and, things like that, right? So, my point is, I forgot what my point was.
It's okay. It was really interesting.
Yeah,
so.
but evolution, the Bruce Lee pattern of evolution was such that it came into germination. Bruce Lee gave these ideas, but it came into germination with the advent of the UFC, and it put every good MMA gym is about constantly refining. And you asked me about the me taking privates with a physician. So my personal journey in evolution and innovation is to learn as much about anatomy as I can. So I said to the doctor, I said, okay, let's talk about the shoulder joint. What is the most common injury you see? And he was an ER doctor at the time. And what's the most common injury you see in the ER on the shoulder? And he said, well, actually, it's kind of this rotator cuff tear. And I said, well, how does this happen? Well, the guy, his shoulder goes way past, his arm goes back, and his shoulder goes forward. And I'm saying, so you're saying when the shoulder's really, really forward and the elbow's back, that the shoulder joint is a very precarious situation. He's like, yeah. So then I took that back and I said, okay, well, here are all our arm locks. How about when we do this arm lock, we make sure that we're getting this shoulder forward and the elbow back. And then suddenly my success rate jumped 90%. In all the arm locks. Submissions. So I'm like, wow, I'm using way less energy. And the minute I get the grip, I rotate the shoulder forward, rotate the elbow back, and boom, the guy taps. And people didn't know, people I could never tap before, like G, one of my fighters. I could never tap him with
G's
this
a beast.
Yeah, we could
like
Kimura. I get him in a
right?
Kimura. I get him in a Kimura, which is a bent arm lock. And then he would defend, and he's stronger than me. So I'd be studying. And people would say the Kimura is, this is a strong guy move, blah, blah, blah. And I would never be able to get him. And then I rotated his shoulder forward, rotated his elbow back, and he's still defending. And then, boom. The tap happened. And that's it.
How does it feel when a fighter that you've pretty much raised prevents you from tapping him with
it feels great.
basic?
No, it's always about evolution.
Yeah. So no problem. We're gonna pause this and then we'll restart it in a second.